Welcome to the Podkey summary of Captain America, the First Avenger. Today's catch-up is all about what Captain America, the First Avenger, is really doing under the hood. It's telling a superhero origin story, sure, but it's also making the case about character, propaganda, patriotism, and why Steve Rogers matters before he ever gets the shield. And around all of that, there's this very deliberate old-school adventure style, plus a surprisingly important bit of Marvel business strategy humming in the background. The big idea is simple and pretty sturdy. The serum doesn't create goodness. It reveals and amplifies what was already there. Steve Rogers is heroic, long before he's physically impressive. He keeps trying to enlist, even though he's sickly and undersized. And when he thinks a grenade is live during testing, he throws himself on it without hesitation. That's the whole case for him in one moment. Nobody had to tell him to perform bravery. He just did it. Joe Johnston's take on the character was important here too. He wasn't aiming for a blind flag waver. Captain America is supposed to stand for resisting tyranny and doing the right thing, not for unquestioning nationalism. That same serum logic is what makes Steve and Johann Schmidt more than just matching strong guys on opposite sides. Hugo Weaving talked about it as an amplification of what's already inside each man. Steve becomes more fully humane, more himself in the best sense. Schmidt goes the other way. His ego and self-absorption get magnified until he becomes the Red Skull, which is a very comic book way of saying the inside starts showing on the outside. So their conflict is philosophical before it's physical. Steve is oriented toward other people. Schmidt is driven by personal need and grandiosity. The muscles and machinery just make the contrast impossible to miss. One of the nicest things about this movie is that it doesn't try to feel like generic modern superhero concrete and CGI. It leans into a pulpy 1940s adventure mood, with wartime tech, propaganda art, commandos, espionage, and Hydra's weird superweapons. The influence is much closer to Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars than to a sleek contemporary action thriller. That choice gives the whole thing personality. You can feel that it wants to be a period adventure first, and an MCU building block second, even though it's obviously doing both. And the villain setup matters too. The filmmakers avoided making him mainly fight ordinary Nazi Party members and use Hydra instead, which kept the story inside Marvel's own universe while still clearly framing the fight as a struggle against tyranny. The Tesseract helps with that balancing act. It belongs to this World War II story, but it also quietly plugs the movie into the larger Marvel mythology. Peggy Carter is another reason the movie still works as more than a simple symbol piece. She's presented as a capable military officer who can operate right alongside Steve, not as somebody waiting to be rescued or just there to admire him from a tasteful distance. Haley Atwell had that great line that Carter can do everything Captain America can do, backwards and in high heels, which is memorable because it gets at the character's energy without making her a gimmick. Her relationship with Steve also lands because it's based on mutual recognition. She sees the real person beneath the symbol, and he treats her with a seriousness the men around her often don't. In a very male world, they each notice the other as modern, capable, and fully real. That gives the romance some weight, but it also means her strength isn't just romantic support. It's central to how the story sees itself. The movie gets sharper when it turns Steve into a national mascot. After Erskine dies and the formula is lost, the government doesn't immediately deploy Captain America as a battlefield asset. First, it turns him into a propaganda machine selling war bonds. That creates a pointed tension between actual service and commercialized patriotism. Steve becomes famous before he becomes effective, which is a very American little contradiction, honestly. The important turn is that he doesn't stay trapped there. When he goes to rescue Bucky Barnes and the captured soldiers, he reclaims the symbol from marketing. That's when Captain America starts to mean something. His legitimacy comes from risking himself for people, not from the costume, the shield, or the applause. Then the ending reframes the whole character. Steve crashes into the Arctic, wakes up nearly 70 years later, and finds that the world he wanted to protect is gone. That shock in modern Times Square turns a World War II victory story into something sadder and more interesting. The phrase people always come back to is "man out of time," and you can see why. It gives the character a built-in way to measure the present against the ideals and assumptions he came from. The opportunity there isn't just culture shock or jokes about technology. It's the bigger question underneath. Has society actually become better in the decades Steve missed? That's a strong premise, because it keeps the character from being sealed inside nostalgia. He arrives, carrying old values into a world that now has to answer back. There's also a production story here that's easy to overlook, because the movie makes it seem pretty seamless. Creating pre-serum Steve Rogers took an unusually extensive visual process. Many scenes involve multiple passes with Chris Evans, a green screen reduction, an empty plate, and a body double, all to sell that smaller version of Steve before the transformation. At the same time, digital effects were reshaping Hugo Weaving's face into the Red Skull. So the movie's argument about identity and transformation was being carried by some very hands-on technical work. Behind that, Marvel itself was in a transitional moment. A $525 million Merrill Lynch investment helped the company independently produce 10 films, while Paramount handled distribution. So Captain America was doing two jobs at once, standing on its own as a period adventure and serving as the fifth entry in a carefully expanding cinematic universe. That balancing act looks normal now, but at the time, it was still the studio proving it could really function as a full film operation. What makes this movie stick is that it keeps asking who Steve Rogers is when you strip away the costume, the sales pitch, and even the era he belongs to. The answer it lands on is refreshingly uncomplicated. A good man made louder. And for a story with super serums, cosmic cubes, and a guy called Red Skull, that's a pretty grounded thing to build everything around. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.